You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have back on the Goldstein on Gelt show Anne Hornung-Soukup, who is the finance director of American Citzens Abroad. Now, the ACA is a group based in Geneva, which helps Americans who have chosen to live outside the United States, which is a lot of the listeners to this show because they're living in Israel. But there are literally millions of Americans who've actually expatriated. Anne, a pleasure to have you back.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for having me back.
So it was fascinating, the topics we discussed last time, and for anyone who missed that, be sure to download that interview at goldsteinongelt.com or simply go to YouTube and see the video of it by looking up Goldstein on Gelt there. And we touched on the topic last time of the thousands of Americans who are now giving up their U.S. citizenship. This sounds so radical, and frankly, when I talk to my family in the States, they think that like I'm insane to even consider such a thing. But tell me, why would someone do this?
It's become very difficult to have a U.S. passport overseas for several different reasons. One very personal and one much more dealing with daily life. The personal one is the FBAR rule, which is the Foreign Bank Account Report. And this was a law. It's been a law for decades, but it was never enforced, and now it's being enforced. Even someone living overseas who doesn't owe any taxes to the United States has to declare to the United States year after year every foreign bank account which they have. Obviously, this was a law which was made for Americans in the United States who were hiding money overseas. But Americans living overseas need a bank account, obviously, to function. So that's one thing. Americans abroad don't necessarily know that they're supposed to be reporting their foreign bank accounts to the United States. And the second aspect is much more general. It's a new law called FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. It was passed in 2010, but it's being put gradually into effect. And it requires banks all over the world to declare their American clients directly to the IRS. So even if you say to yourself, I don't have to, I'm not going to declare my foreign bank accounts to the United States, your bank will do it for you. So it's two reasons. It's two reasons Americans, and with the consequence that some banks overseas are saying, we don't want American clients. We don't want to deal with this. We will give up all American clients.
We've actually seen that in Israel. That, for me personally, was a boon in my business because I'm on the radio only once a week, but my day job is that I'm an investment advisor here in Jerusalem. And we started to get calls. It was already a couple of years ago from people who got what we referred to as the Dear John letter.
Yes.
Dear John, we are the biggest bank in Israel, or there's not that many banks in Israel. You're one of them, and we will no longer have you as an investment client with us. Sometimes they would let them do local banking.
Exactly.
But for us, frankly, I was perfectly happy about it because we got millions of dollars of new business.
Right.
But it was terrible for these clients. And a lot of times it said, please be out by the end of the week or the end of the month, and they were in a panic.
It's very radical. We've spoken from ACA, we've spoken directly to some of the people who wrote the legislation for the FATCA law, and they never expected banks all around the world to close down the accounts of Americans. They never expected this. For them, it was a way of rooting out tax cheats, tax criminals. And we overseas, we are what's known right now as collateral damage. This was not expected, and it's happening all over the world. It's not just in Israel, it's happening in Switzerland, it's happening in France, in the UK, it's happening in Asia, it's happening all over the world. There are banks saying, I don't want to deal with American clients. It's just too burdensome, too expensive, too complicated, and the scope for error and being attacked by the United States in some way for an error is too huge. Too huge.
So if someone gives up his passport, right, he goes into the embassy, he turns it in and says, okay, I'm done, thank you very much. Is he out of the tax net?
He is. Normally, we've just spoken to several people who have very recently renounced their U.S. citizenship in Switzerland, and there was not a single question saying, you have to be in tax compliance. Have you declared your foreign bank accounts to the United States? Otherwise, we won't let you give up your passport. However, there is a law that says in order for that renunciation to be accepted by the United States, you have to be compliant on your back taxes or your back declarations, even if you don't owe. No one knows exactly what this means. No one knows exactly what will happen. What happens with a renunciation, it's a two-step process. You go to the consulate, the embassy, and you hand in your passport. You say, I want to give this up. I don't want it anymore. I have this other passport. And then you get, a matter of a few months later, you get a certificate of renunciation that says, yep, you gave it up, and we let you give it up. You're no longer an American citizen. Now, what happens between those two events, we don't exactly know. Does your renunciation certificate go straight to the IRS, and they look it up and they say, nope, this person is not compliant. They haven't declared their FBARs for the last 5 years as they're supposed to, and we won't let them renounce. We haven't had any cases like that yet, but we're a little nervous about it. ACA is a little nervous about that.
Is there some concept that even after you give it up, then you still have like a 10-year window during which time you would have to pay tax to the U.S.?
No, that used to be the law. That used to be the law, but the law changed, and now there's an exit tax. The exit tax, because this 10-year after you renounce was kind of ridiculous. You know, to tax someone who is not American for 10 years, it was totally undoable, which hasn't stopped them on many things. I mean, the FATCA is basically totally undoable, but they're trying to do it anyhow. So that aside, in the renunciation, if you're over $2 million in assets or you have a certain amount, I can't remember what it is, you have a tax bill of, say, over $150,000 a year. It's quite high. The bar is set quite high. If you're part of this over $2 million, over $150,000 owed in taxes every year, over $2 million in assets, if you're part of that category, then you pay an exit tax. In order to give up your passport, to renounce your U.S. citizenship, you have to pay an exit tax, which is a certain percentage of those assets as if you sold it the day that you gave up your passport. So no, there's no 10-year holding period where you owe taxes, but there is an exit tax if you have a certain amount of assets over a certain amount.
Okay. So in a minute, we'll talk more about that. I just want to reintroduce you. We're happy to have back on the Goldstein on Gelt show Anne Hornung-Soukup. She's the finance director of American Citzens Abroad, which is an organization based in Geneva that was started decades ago to help U.S. citizens with a number of the issues that arise with being outside the U.S. We've been focusing on taxes. In fact, Anne previously on the show spoke to us a lot about some of the real tax problems and reporting problems that U.S. citizens living overseas, in fact, have. If you missed that interview, be sure to download it at goldsteinongelt.com or simply go to YouTube where all of our videos, all of our interviews show up. You can look it up there. You'll also find there the interview that I did with Mary Louise Serrato, who is another director of ACA. She also spoke to us a lot about this. If you are a U.S. citizen living outside the U.S. or if you're considering living outside the U.S., you should absolutely listen to these interviews to learn about what some of the issues are. And a minute ago, you were telling us about the exit tax that might hit someone. You said this is only for the ultra-wealthy. What sort of tax is this?
I'm not quite sure what the tax is. As I say, I'm not a tax preparer myself, but over a certain threshold, there is an exit tax. I believe it's something like 30%. But there's calculations to be made, whether you've been declaring taxes, whether you haven't been declaring taxes, whether you've owed taxes, paid taxes, etc. There is a relatively, nothing is simple in taxation, as everyone probably listening to this show knows. Nothing is simple and straightforward, but there is a certain calculation and there is an exit tax which you have to pay to the United States in order to have the pleasure of giving up your U.S. passport. So it's not quite as straightforward as marching to the, let me give you one last, we were talking on the previous show about the scary aspects of some of these laws, and this is a scary aspect. If the United States determines that, in fact, you're renouncing your U.S. citizenship for tax purposes, strictly for tax purposes, because you don't want to pay those back taxes that you owed, they won't refuse your renunciation, but they can, under current law, a new law, they can refuse you entrance to the United States Perhaps not for the rest of your life. That was a proposal that died, but they certainly can make it hard for you to go back to the United States. Now, for grandparents overseas who have children working in the States with their grandchildren, who would be faced with the possibility of not being able ever to go to the United States or being hassled every time they go, this is a scary thought. This is a very scary thought. So it's one more consequence of renunciation. I don't want to scare people. When you're really determined to renounce your U.S. citizenship, I understand perfectly well, but there are consequences that I think everyone should know.
Do you know if this applies as well to people who have a green card?
Green card holders for a certain number of years, I believe it's 5 or 6 years, are subject to U.S. taxation, no matter where they live. People don't know this. People come back, let's say, to Israel after working in New York for 10 years, and they slip that green card into a drawer because you never know, in 2 years they might get another job in the U.S. But in fact, they're supposed to be declaring their income and their foreign bank accounts to the United States for 5 or 6 years. It's on the IRS website. So yes, green card holders are in this too. Up until recently, and perhaps people don't know this either, up until a few years ago when this all blew up because of new and newly enforced laws, there was no formal way to give up your green card because no one did. It just expired after a while, but no one gave it up. Now they've had to institute a system of officially giving up your green card because people are horrified that they're supposed to be declaring taxes to the United States, and it's being enforced.
Wow. So other than the ACA, which is your sort of volunteer level organization, it's not a government organization, how can Americans, I mean, there are millions of them, as you've pointed out, how can they have any representation in Washington in order to protect their interests? Or is it really just that no one cares enough and we're just the low-hanging fruit as far as the IRS is
Unfortunately, I believe we have very little voice overseas. We have no specific officer in the U.S. government which addresses issues of interest to us. There is a letter which has been written by members of Congress now to, I believe, the president, asking for legislation to study at least the situation of Americans overseas by several congressional representatives who are very supportive of Americans overseas. So I suggest to your listeners, if they want to work on this, is that first of all they join American Citzens Abroad. We consider ourselves, and we are considered by many in Washington, to be the voice of Americans overseas. Our website is www.americansabroad.org. And the second thing is write to your congressional representatives, even if they never write back, which mine have not.
But wait, if you don't live there anymore, then you don't have a congressional representative.
You do have a congressional representative. You vote. You can vote from overseas, and you vote in the place where you last lived. The place where you last lived can be very subjective. If you lived for 6 months in a walk-up someplace and your real home that you consider is the place in Brooklyn or the place in Los Angeles, vote from the place that's closest to your heart. That's exactly what I do. But you can vote for your local representative of the place where you last lived. This is entirely legal, straightforward. It's very easy because we've also worked on the voting issue, and it can be done. And I absolutely encourage people overseas to vote in the presidential election now, and to write to the candidates, from overseas and say, I vote in this congressional section, in the vote
this is what I want.
District, and
but
this
do you
is
think
what I ask you to
ultimately this is what people, in other words, let's say you're a member of Congress and you get a letter, if they don't have 50,000 people overseas in any district, they'll get one letter from, one guy in Jerusalem.
This is the problem. This is exactly the problem.
It seems like it's not only an uphill battle, but there's no interest, in other words, on Washington.
We've actually, ACA over the years has led to a law being introduced in Congress. It's never gone anywhere, but we've had a law introduced several times which would set up a representative for Americans overseas in Congress, at least a non-voting representative, the way Guam, I believe Puerto Rico, perhaps Washington, D.C. There are non-voting representatives. The only thing that they can't do is vote on the final passage of a law, but they can introduce laws, they can work on Congress, they can educate, they can have things put into the congressional record. There is a very strong record of this, and we feel that this would also help us, at least overseas. Perhaps it wouldn't solve all of our problems, but it would help Americans living overseas. As you say, we're between 4 and 7 million people. It's a lot. It's bigger than something like the 15 smallest states in the United States. So we are a force to be reckoned with if we can group
Come
together and, yes, act together. So
Sure.
I encourage people, join ACA and work with us, facing Congress, facing the administration on getting help for us overseas.
All right. Okay. Anne Hornung-Soukup, who is the Finance Director of American Citizens Abroad, ACA, I want to thank you very much for coming back on the show, and I hope we'll have a chance again to speak to you in the future.
Thanks, Doug. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.